Okay. Now I'm online. I'm live. Perfect. Okay, just let's wait one more minute before we start with the webinar. Still a few people joining. Okay, so let's start with today's webinar. So hello and welcome to this Orcharhino webinar. My name is Martin Grundy. I'm consultant at the Ethics, the company behind the orcharhino, which will be the topic of today's webinar, or more specifically, how to use Puppet in combination with orcharhino. Short note here, this webinar will be divided into two parts. The first part will be a wrap-up of orcharhino. What is orcharhino? How can you benefit by using the orcharhino? And the second part will be a live demonstration where I will show how to use Puppet in combination with the orcharhino. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. Just be aware that there will be a short delay, probably about 1 minute or so until I can see the question. I will try to answer them after each part. Okay, so now without further ado, let's start with the first part. So let's open the slides here. Right. So here we are. Perfect. Okay, so what is the orcharhino? Well, in short, the orcharhino is our in-house server lifecycle management tool. What does this mean? How can the orcharhino help you? Well, as the name suggests, it is meant to help you with the management of your servers in your data center during their complete life cycle. And this will be done in several ways. As you probably know, if you have to manage infrastructure, everything managing by hand, all your servers, all your configuration, all your deployment, all your software management will be very tedious. And it is, of course, error prone to do this by hand, especially if you have to repeat the same tasks again and again. It would be much more advantageous if you have a sort of a scheme, a workflow, which you can adhere to. So what you actually want to do is to automate your workflow and to avoid these errors altogether. And this can be done on several levels. So let's first have a look at the initial deployment of a host. You normally have some sort of virtualization layer to interface to for the deployment of your host. This might be, for example, VMware, KVM, libvirt, Proxmox, or oVirt, or you may have an API from a cloud provider, for example, like Azure, AWS, or Google Cloud. Orcharhino can do, sorry, Orcharhino can automate your deployment to these instances, to these hypervisors. You just have to add some general information, for example, where you want to deploy your hosts and what operating system you want to deploy. And then Orcharhino will do the rest for you. Of course, given that you first configure Orcharhino accordingly. So all these initial deployment, all these setup steps like booting, provisioning with the corresponding templates, provisioning templates, all this is done automatically by Orcharhino, and your server is then set up. And after your initial deployment, of course, you want to configure your server. Of course, this can be done by including your configuration in the initial deployment templates, but especially if your setup is more, let's say, sophisticated or complicated, you want to use a configuration management tools. This can be, for example, SaltStack, Ansible, or Puppet, where the focus of this webinar lies on. So what you want to do is to actually initially deploy your host with a minimal configuration and then use your configuration management tool to, well, let's say finish the job. And Orcharhino can integrate with all of these three configuration management tools and again can do the job for you. In this case, it doesn't matter if you configure these tools from scratch or you use an actually existing setup, because you can then integrate it. For example, if you have a Puppet master already present in your infrastructure, you can configure it to send reports to your Orcharhino. Now we have tackled the initial deployment and the configuration of the host, but one part is still missing, which is patch and release management. So, more generally speaking, what is patch and release management? Well, you want overview and control over the software which is available on your host and installed on your host. Orcharhino supports all these major Linux distributions in the sense of software management and allows you to monitor the software available to your hosts and the patches which can be applied to your hosts and the software installed on your host. In these cases, Orcharhino supports so-called errata. What is an erratum? Erratum is a kind of, let's say, list of software or software packages regarding a special issue, for example, a security vulnerability or a patch or an update of a software. And an erratum tells you exactly how to fix this issue by giving the details of which packages you have to update on your host. And via Orcharhino, you can select different errata and apply it to your host directly. Well, now to the release management. So this first part was the patch management, now to the release management. Well, you want to make sure that all of your software you roll out to your environments, to your critical environments, to your production environment is tested. What does this mean? Well, you can define so-called development environment first, where you can test all your software and patches and ensure that you don't land in, well, dependency hell. Ensure that all your software is stable, and then you can test it in a testing environment on test hosts, and then you can roll it out to production. And this you can do with the Orcharhino by defining so-called environments where you can group your different hosts into. Then you can freeze your software, your code, and then you can apply it to development, test this specific state. If you have finished developing testing, then you can roll it out to production. And with that, we have, well, tackled all parts of the life cycle of the server, from the initial deployment to configuration management and software, or better said, release management. So you can configure all these parts with Orcharhino. Well, and here at Artix, we provide and engineer the Orcharhino to you. And therefore, we have several departments related to that. We have the consulting, where I am a part of. We want to ensure that our customers find the right way to configure Ocarino regarding to their specific environment or infrastructure setup. Therefore, we provide initial concepts, implement them, and also offer trainings. We have our support, which is always important for an enterprise product. So we want to ensure that you don't experience any issues with the Ocarino. And if you have an issue, we want to help as fast as possible to fix it. And of course, we have our engineering department. Ocarino is based on the open source tool Foreman. So it's crucial to be in constant communication with the Foreman community. And of course, we develop and add new features to the Ocarino with every release. For example, support of some of the major Linux distributions with the patch management comes from our engineering departments, from our developers. So we want to ensure that Ocarino is always up to date. At the moment, we support the patch management of all these Linux distributions you can see here. And we support the initial deployment of Windows hosts, and we support all these providers you see at the bottom of the slide, like KVM, VMware, Proxmox, and some cloud providers, and the configuration management tools Puppet, SourceStack, and Ansible. So this is already the end of the first part. So let's see if there are any questions yet. No questions so far. So then let's start with the live demonstration. So I will share my screen now. Okay. And what you see here is our test Ocarino. So we have a list of hosts which are already registered to the Ocarinos. You see quite a few different operating systems, different versions. And for the start, I want to show you just how easy it is to create a host with Ocarino. I can just click Create Host. Now, so let's give it a name. Perhaps we want to deploy a CentOS host. Perhaps spelled correctly too. Then I configure organization location, so where to group my hosts. And then select host group, which is just a container for all configuration I need to deploy this VM in our vCenter, a Center 7 VM. And all I have to do now is to click Submit. And the host will be deployed, and that's it. Okay. So what does this mean for an already deployed host? Well, let's jump back to the host list. Let's pick this CentOS 7 host, for example. Well, here you see an installed host. You see there are some errors here where we actually leave these hosts on an order a software state to be able to demonstrate how to install errata. But today I want to show you how to run Puppet on such a host. So Puppet is already configured on this Ocarino. There is a Puppet master running on the same machine as the orcharhino itself. And all we have to do to trigger a Puppet run, so a configuration of our host, is by clicking here, run Puppet once. And that's all I have to do. Just wait a moment and we will see that this is our first manually triggered Puppet run. Of course, here in this overview, I only see that's a success. Perhaps let's leave the full screen here, a bit easier. But what actually happens? Well, this I want to show you on a web console. Let's open the web console. Open this terminal here. So what it actually triggers is a run of the Puppet agent on the host. And as this host is already configured, it shouldn't change anything on the host at all. Just make sure that this is the case. And we see it says here apply configuration version, then this ID number, and we see applied catalog in under 1 second and no changes at all. We should see them here if there would be any changes. So our host is definitely up to date due to its configuration. But what configuration does the host actually get? Well, for this, we go to configure, Puppet, and have a look which classes are present on the orcharhino. Let's open this. And here we see all Puppet classes available or known to the orcharhino. What is a Puppet class? Well, it's synonymously known as a module. So everyone who knows the concept of Puppet modules, classes here are the contents of Puppet modules, which contain information how to configure your host for a special, well, circumstance, so to say. For example, if you want an Apache installed on your host, you could use this Puppet class Apache. If you want to change the crony settings on your host, let's look. You could use this Puppet class crony, or perhaps you just want to change the message of the day. You could use this message of the day module. Of course, it's your task to bring these modules to the orcharhino and configure them correctly. Well, let's see how this is. I will show you how this is done a little bit later, but just let's stick to the crony module first. So you see here different sections: crony configuration, install, parameters, and services. And we see a bunch of host groups which this class is assigned to. So as I already said, a host group is nothing more than a container or block containing all the relevant information you need to deploy a host in a special subset. So here we have different host groups for different operating systems. And this crony module was added to these host groups. So our Center 7 host should already have this class or module configured. Let's have a look. So here's the configuration of the Center 7 host. We have this tab here named Puppet Classes. And here we see inherited classes from CentOS 7. And we see Crony is attached to this host. So this host will be configured using the Crony class or Crony module. So this is the general setup. Now the problem arises, how can we pass our own configuration, our own parameters to a class? Well, we can see the parameters here under this tab, Smart Class Parameters. Let's look for Crony again. So for our time server setup, and we see all these parameters available for the Crony class. So we have a bunch of options to customize the setup of Crony with the help of these parameters, which we can pass to the class. And this can be done on different levels, for example, at host group level, environment level, and so on. But I want to do it at the host level now. So we just switch to parameters, and we see here, Crony should use this NTP server. So let's try to override this value. Use a different NTP server. I will submit this. And now we will start a new pub and agent run. One more thing. Probably we have here, sorry. So it's not working yet, which means that the smart class parameter servers must be set on a different level. So let's just search for that. Here we go. Right. And here we have different override levels. So we have one at the environment level, at the FQDN level, and at the host group level, which overrides the setup at the host level. This is something we do not want at the moment, so I will just delete them and use the default value for everything at this moment, because I want to set it at the host level now. So we will reload this page. So now we have this default value, and now we will override it to just use the NTP2 Norris net server. Let's do this. Okay, successfully updated. Now a new run. And now we see that the NTP3 Norris server was replaced by the NTP2 Norris net time server for our Crony configuration. So our Crony config file was changed just as we expected. Right. So much about classes and parameters in general. Now, where do you get these classes or modules from? Well, you can actually have different sources. Most likely will be the Puppet Forge, perhaps even from Puppet Labs themselves, or you might have your own modules if you write your own. So how can we ensure that all the modules are available to the Puppet Master on the Orcharhino and known to the Orcharhino itself? Well, for that, I want to use Art&K. So Art&K is a tool which actually connects to a Git repository which contains a configuration file for Art&K. And this configuration file is nothing more than a list of modules. So such an Art&K configuration file can actually look like this. So you have a list of different modules, for example, Apache, apt, checkmk, and so on. And you have to define where to get it from. For example, here from a Git repository, this is a custom Git, and from which branch. And then by this configuration, Art&K will automatically download these modules from the correct branch you specified in this file and put it into environments. And where does Art&K know where to put your modules? So in which environment to put them? Well, this is the branch of the repository. So if you have a production branch, it will put it in your production environment. If you have a development branch with such a configuration file in it, it will put it in a development branch. So let's have a look where these modules actually reside. So we are here on the Orcharhino, and now we are in the directory where all our environments, our Puppet environments reside. And we have a production environment which should be assigned to our production hosts. And here we have our corresponding modules in there. So you can actually define different environments for your Puppet setup and can group your hosts into these environments similar to the patch and release management I showed for the software earlier. And here we have our Puppet file. Here we have our modules folder with all our modules inside. Right. So let's be here. Okay. So how do we actually update our modules when we apply a change to them? Let's say we update our Puppet file, our configuration file in the repository which Art&K reads. How can we promote these changes to the Orcharhino? Well, it's quite simple. You can execute Art&K deploy environment, and here with -p -v, that we can see a little bit what Art&K does actually. Let's execute this. And we see all these modules are now updated, or more correctly, the old ones are deleted and the new ones are deployed by Art&K, which in this case, of course, Doesn't change a thing because we're up to date. But we can force it to apply change. I'm sorry for the pop-up. How can we do that? Well, I will just delete a module from this folder. So which one should we pick? Perhaps the message of the day. Let's delete the message of the day module. Done now. Now let's switch to the to the classes tab. Don't need these ones anymore. And now we have to tell the orcharhino to synchronize the modules from the Puppet master, which are actually changed right now with the GUI here. So what I will do is import environments from orcharhino itself. And now the orcharhino will check if any changes to the Puppet masters has happened, which actually did. And we should see the changes right now. So in order to see the changes in the GUI, you have to import the classes here. Because first the Puppet master is changed, and then you will promote these changes to everything else. So it says production environment, operation remove, message of the day module. Let's update this. And now our operation is successful, genau. So we have removed the message of the day module. But of course, this is an error. This is not the configuration we want. I did this by hand right now. So we actually want to undo this change. So let's once again execute R10K on the orcharhino. And let's see if we get our message of the day module back. A bit of a lag, it seems. No, it's fine. So here it is again. So R10K was able to, well, update or perhaps rescue our environment. And all I have to do now is to import the module again. So now we have the add operation, and we actually update our orcharhino, and our message of the day is back. And now in the next step, I go to the host, to our CentOS 7 demo host, and I can actually attach this module to the host directly. Okay. And add a configuration for the message of the day. Let's see. Let's execute the Puppet agent on the host manually so we can see what the agent does. And we see now that a message of the day, MOTD, this file, was modified by the module we just added with some standard default message of the day contained in the message of the day module, which in the next step we could actually customize again. Good. And that's it so far for using Orcharhino in combination with Puppet. So this is actually the end of the live demo. I will just check if there are any questions remaining. Yeah, okay. There's one question regarding the setup of Orcharhino within existing Puppet Master. Okay, if I understand it correctly, there's the question how this setup is actually... yeah. So how the setup is actually compatible with using Jira. Well, in this case, if you have a Puppet Master which uses Jira, you have to decide. You probably want to stick to the Jira and use your Jira setup if you want to keep Jira, if I understand it correctly. So what you can, so this configuration of the parameters I showed you here, if this mask guard parameter is then not possible, but what is possible is that you can actually, for example, send your Puppet reports from your Puppet master to the Orcharhino directly. So for example, from our last Puppet run here 2 minutes ago, you would get such kind of configuration reports, and you can configure your Puppet master to send them to your Orcharhino. And of course, you can also configure your R10K on your Puppet master. Okay. Any further questions? Not that I see. No, then no more questions. Okay, then thank you for listening and goodbye.